Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. Today we will be studying the last section of Surah Baqarah, these last 15 or 16 verses. And either today or maybe inshallah next week we'll be finishing off this surah, and then we will be moving on to its paired surah, which is Surah Al Imran. So let us start with verse 261. The text reads, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ أَنْبَتَتْ سَبْعَ سَنَابِلَ فِي كُلِّ سُنْبُلَةٍ مِئَةُ حَبَّةٍ وَاللَّهُ يُضَاعِفُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُم فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ لَا يُتْبِعُونَ مَا أَنْفَقُوا مَنًّا وَلَا أَذًى لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. This is the practice of the Almighty, providing guidance or leading astray. So if they do not accept it, leave them and fully understand that the example of the deed of those who spend their wealth in the way of God is like a grain of corn which brings forth 7 ears, such that each bears 100 grains. God, in accordance with His wisdom, provides in abundance in this manner to whomsoever He wills. And in reality, God is munificent. He is aware of everything. Those who spend their wealth in the way of God then do not follow this spending by reminders of their generosity or by hurting others, have their reward with their Lord, and they shall have nothing to fear there, nor shall they ever be sorrowful. قول معروف ومغفرة خير من صدقة يتبعها عزاء والله غني حليم. A kind word, and at unpleasant instances, a little forgiveness is better than charity followed by inflicting hurt. And you should know that God is self-sufficient from such charity. On such an attitude from you, He could have deprived you. However, such is He that along with this, He is also very gracious. So you can see, dear viewers, as far as these two verses are concerned, they bring out the rewards and benefits of charity. They tell us that how, if we spend in the way of God, how the reward will be multiplied by many hundred times. And of course, the example given here is the example in which the grain of corn, which each of these corns, they bears 100 ears or 100 grains. So it's like having 7 ears and each of these ears bearing 100 grains. And remember that the Quran was being revealed to individuals who were farmers, who were tillers of the soil, who very well knew what cultivation is, and the example that is given to them is from their own field. They very well know how they would grow crops and how ears would sprout and how each grain from the ear would be done for. So they are given this example that if you find this abundance of crop in your own field, that is exactly the same way as God is going to reward you for every good deed that you do. And this is something, of course, which is a great motivation for every person who would like to move in the way of God, who would like to do all sorts of charitable works in the way of God. And then it is said that people who spend in the way of God, they have to be very careful that they do not remind people of their generosity, because this is something which is going to inflict hurt on those to whom you have done a good turn. So remember, whenever you are charitable towards other people, this in itself is something which in a way compromises the self-esteem of the person with whom you are being kind, because of course he is accepting something or she is accepting something, and as a result, in a certain way, they do sacrifice the self-esteem. But when you start reminding them of your generosity, then this self-esteem is sacrificed to the utmost. And it is an absolutely unbecoming behavior. It is something that cannot be condoned in any way, that you first do a good turn to someone and then you start reminding that person later on that, look what I did for you, look how I spent on you. So the Quran says that this is something that is absolutely unbecoming. It cannot be acceptable. And if a person is able to save himself from such a misdemeanor, then the Quran says, لا خوف عليهم لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. that their reward is with their Lord, which means that it is safe with their Lord, it is protected with their Lord, and they have nothing to fear. And then the Quran, in fact, says that a kind word and at unpleasant instances a little forgiveness is better than charity followed by inflicting hurt. So, once again, this hurt is the one that we have just spoken of, the hurt which is caused on people when you start reminding them how you were charitable towards them, how you were good towards them. So, the Quran says that it is much better that you express your own kindness at such an instance instead of reminding that person what you did. Just maybe a hint in a very positive way, in a way that you are able to understand that this is how goodness is, that it is something which must not be expressed as a favor. It should be, if at all, in a very subtle way, and that too in the form of a kind word. And then the Quran says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal aza. كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس ولا يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فمثله كمثل صفوان عليه تراب فأصابه وابل فتركه صلدا لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. Believers, do not waste your charity by reminders of generosity and by hurting others, like those who spend their wealth to show off before others and believe neither in God nor in the last day. So the example of such people is like a large rock covered with soil. Then a heavy shower falls upon it and leaves it hard and bare. On the day of judgment, they will gain nothing from what they have earned. And in reality, God never guides such ungrateful people. So the topic is continuing, and it was stated in a way that people who protect themselves from this behavior, they will be rewarded by the Almighty, and they will be in gardens of bliss. Now, the same thing is stated in a different way, and it is said that on the other hand, people who persist in this behavior, who take to this behavior, that they start reminding people of their generosity. So the Quran first of all says, La tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal aza, that when you start reminding people of generosity, this of course is something that inflicts pain on the person who receives your charity, then what you're doing is that you are rendering your own charity as totally baseless. It will have nothing before God. It will not bear any fruit before God. And then, of course, the example is given. كَالَّذِي يُنْفِقُ مَالَهُ رِيَاءَ النَّاسِ. This is much like a person who spends to show off, who is ostentatious. And the example which is given here is that of a farmer who, upon seeing some soil on a rock, begins cultivating that area. However, with the very first outburst of rain, the soil with the crops drifts away into the valley, exposing the plain surface beneath. So the Quran says that very similar will be the fate of those who remind people of their generosity and hurt those whom they spend upon. These people will earn no reward in the hereafter as well. In spite of professing faith, this deed will earn them nothing, just as the deed of those disbelievers who would not earn any reward, who show off. I mean, they're spending. The purpose is to just show off. So, in other words, just as showing off, bragging, and boasting of your good deeds is not going to earn a reward, in a very similar way, if you are going to hurt people, you're causing them this tremendous harassment, so to speak, that they are constantly reminded of the good deed that you did to them. And the Quran says this is much like how a farmer is going to grow a crop on a surface in which he thinks that is going to bear fruit and bear results, but a very, very thin outburst of rain is sufficient to lay it bare. So in a very similar way, just as that crop is not going to bear anything, in a very similar way, the reward of these people or the consequence of what they have done will be nothing at all on the day of judgment. And then the Quran says, it goes on to further give an example of how the spending is going to be beneficial. It says, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ كَمَثَلِ جَنَّةٍ بِرَبْوَةٍ أَصَابَهَا وَابِلٌ فَآتَتْ أُكُلَهَا ضِعْفَيْنِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يُصِبْهَا وَابِلٌ فَطَلٌّ Wallahu bima ta'maluna basir. It says that the example of those who spend their wealth to win the pleasure of God and to firmly make themselves adhere to the truth is that of an orchard which is on a high and level ground. If a heavy shower falls upon it, it yields up twice its normal produce. And even if a heavy shower does not fall on it, a drizzle proves sufficient. Keep this example in mind and rest assured that God is seeing whatever you do. So, again, now this is the contrary example which is given, that contrary to those people who inflict hurt by reminding people of their generosity, and at the same time they think that their good deed is going to bear fruit, but contrary to that, it has no weight in the eyes of God. So this is one category of people. But the opposite category of people which is then mentioned, and this is a very common feature of the Quran, that whenever people are mentioned in a particular mold, in a particular attitude that they have adopted, and that is something which is detrimental to their hereafter, immediately right after that, the Quran mentions the right way, the correct way in this regard, and this is exactly what has happened here as well. So the Quran says that people who spend their wealth to gain the pleasure of God and to firmly make themselves attached to the truth is that of an orchard on a high and level ground, which means that if a heavy shower falls upon it, it will yield double the produce. It's not going to lay bare. It's a thick foliage is there. It's going to produce lush and luxurious growth. And even if the downpour is not much, even if it is half of its original downpour, then the Quran says even then a drizzle would prove sufficient. So such is the nature of spending, that if you are spending for the cause of God, to attach yourselves firmly for the truth or to the truth, then remember that if a heavy shower, it's like a plant that you have sown in the soil, and even a very small drizzle will produce its effect. And if there is a heavy drizzle or there's a very heavy downpour, then the result would be that much more production will take place. In a very similar way, people who spend for the cause of God, they will find their charity being returned to them in a way that it will be, a very little effort will earn them a lot. And if they make more effort, of course, then the consequence will be much more as well. So you see this recurrent theme of the Quran, which you can see pervades the whole structure of the Quran. And remember that this is something which the Quran has started to mention as a build-up, as a prelude. As we'll see, it goes forward, and some of the directives that relate to the proscribed part of the economic directives of Islam, they are mentioned. So these occur as a prelude, and of course I'm referring to to interest, and especially interest and interest-bearing transactions, of course, and then at the same time writing down these transactions whenever you acquire something on loan. So these are coming up. So basically this is like a prelude to those directives as well, that people who spend for the cause of God and they are ones who would like their spending to be rewarded, then this is how this is going to produce effect. And then it says, Wallahu bima ta'maluna basir, that rest assured that God is watching whatever you are doing. So nothing is going to go amiss, nothing is going to be missed out in any way. And then the Quran says, أَيَوَدُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن تَكُونَ لَهُ جَنَّةٌ مِّن نَخِيلٍ وَأَعْنَابٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ لَهُ فِيهَا مِن كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ وَأَصَابَهُ الْكِبَرُ وَلَهُ ذُرِّيَّةٌ ضُعَفَاءُ فأصابها إعصار فيه نار فاحترقت كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تتفكرون. Would any one of you wish that he has an orchard of dates and grapes, underneath which streams of water flow? There are fruits of all kinds in it, and he grows old, and his children are as yet feeble, and the orchard be blasted by a fiery whirlwind, and it burn to ashes. This will be the condition of people on the Day of Judgment who mar their spending in the way of God by reminders of generosity and by hurting other people. In this manner, God does explain to you His revelations so that you may reflect. So viewers, you can see that just as earlier on it was said that a person who spends for the cause of God in order to, and then that spending is followed up by reminding people of his generosity, then just as the growth that takes place on surface, which seemingly has soil, just as a little outburst of rain, it lays it totally bare, and it leaves itself with nothing, no yield at all. So just as that example was given earlier on, now another example is given. Once again, the same mold is adopted, the same pattern is adopted. Of course, the Arabs being cultivators, being farmers, being crop producers, for them this example is something which is very, very eloquent, which is something which is going to really take root in their hearts. So it says that if any one of you has orchards of dates and palms, and of course this is a very common feature of the orchards which were found in Arabia, and of course the Arabs would relish such orchards that would be on high ground, and therefore they will be protected from storms and from heavy winds, and at the same time from floods also, because being on the high ground, the water would be in the valley that would surround them. So it says that there are fruits of all kinds. So it's like saying that you have all kinds of good crops and fruits in your orchard, and then a person grows old and he has young children. So the desire of a person who grows old and he has young children would be that these crops and these orchards, they take care of their children. But then the Quran says that what will happen, that right at the time when you need your crops and your orchards and your grapes and your fruits for your children, right at that time, a fiery blast of wind comes in, and it has that rumbling effect, and it reduces the whole orchard to ashes. What will be the consequence? The consequence will be that at the time that you needed most that orchard to take care of your children, at that very time it was laid as wasted and bare. So the Quran says that this is the example of those who, when they spend, they start reminding people of their generosity and their charitable behavior. So you see, the Quran has actually taken up this topic at length, and it has made it a point to make people realize that the self-esteem of people is of utmost importance. And when you sacrifice, when you cast aspersions at their self-esteem, when you compromise their self-esteem, then God does not like this at all. If you are going to give for the cause of God, that is sufficient, that you must realize that this basically is an opportunity that He has given to you. You are not showing favor, not doing a favor to someone. In fact, it is God who is showing His favor to you by giving you this opportunity to spend it on other people, to spend whatever you have on other people. So instead of counting this opportunity as an opportunity, you take it as an opportunity to remind other people how generous you were. And the Quran says that this is something which is despicable. This is not acceptable in any way. And then it says, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. In this manner does God explain to you His revelations so that you may reflect. Again, the way the Quran has given this example shows that the previous example, if anything was left that a person could not have understood, then this is another example which is given, that remember that if you are going to spend in the cause of God, and that charity and that spending is the one that will be earning you reward, and that reward is something that you would like for yourself to leave behind for your children, because a person is the most concerned about his children, and especially when they are feeble, especially when they are young. So he would like all his wealth to be beneficial to them. But the Quran says that look at this, that you were rich all your life, you had that benefit for your own self, but when the time came for that benefit to be transferred and accrued for your children, right at that time the whole crop was destroyed. Such is the example of those people who, when they spend in charity, they continuously remind people of their own generosity. So now, in fact, let us also finish off this verse, and then we'll take up your questions. It says, "Ya ayyuhallazina amanu anfiqu min tayyibati ma kasabtum wa mimma akhrajna lakum min al-ard wa la tayammamu al-khabisa minhu tunfiquna wa lastum bi'akhizihi illa an tughmidu fihi wa'lamu anna Allaha ghaniyyun hamid." Believers, spend from your pure wealth, and from that also which we have brought out of the earth for you, and do not even think of spending anything worthless from it in the way of God. You spend from such things But such is your own situation that you yourselves are not prepared to receive such that thing unless after you reduce its price. And bear in mind that God does not need such spending from you. God is self-sufficient. He has all worthy attributes. So another thing which is now reminded here, remember these are the pitfalls of charity, that neither we should show off this charity nor should we remind people of our charity. Now another thing which is mentioned here is that you should spend from the pure wealth that you have, and of course from whatever produce that your land gives. And the stress here is that the wealth the Almighty gives you, of course, should be earned in a pure way. So in other words, wealth which is illegal or earned illegally, or wealth which is impure. And this was very, very possible in the times of the Prophet himself, because you see a lot of wealth was given in the form of kind. So the livestock that people would have, the goats and the camels and the sheep, they could be easily traded for this, and you could have just disposed of your weak and your not up to the mark livestock, and you could have done so. But the Almighty says that this is how you have to be, that if you are presenting your livestock or anything for the cause of God, then they should be the pure ones, the best ones, and nothing which is earned out of the right way, which is illegal, is something which is going to be accepted by God. So this gives us further guidance that pure wealth has to be spent. Wealth which has been earned in a pure way, in a legal way, is something which is the demand of God. And of course, not only that wealth, but also the produce that we have from our land. So that is why the Quran says, وَمِمَّا أَخْرَجْنَا لَكُم مِنَ الْأَرْضِ, that whatever we have made for you to come out, that is how you should also spend. And that is precisely why, viewers, we know that when we give zakat, or when we spend in charity, so just as we have to pay zakat on the wealth that we have, we also need to pay zakat from the produce that we generate from our lands, and similarly, by analogy, from other factories as well, which are means of produce. So the Quran says that وَلَا تَيَّمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ, that do not even think that you should spend something worthless in the way of God, and something that when you yourself would be presented with that, you will not accept it except with reduced price. So what you do not like for your own self, how can you give it in the way of God? So anything which is worthless is not acceptable to God, because God would like you to spend from your pure wealth. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. And this is a very beautiful sentence which ends this verse. It says that this spending is not of any use to God. I mean, if you're giving something good or something worthless, whatever you're giving, God does not need your spending at all. He is self-sufficient. He is Ghani, and He is Hamid. He has all worthy attributes. If anyone is going to benefit from your spending, it is your own self. So it is in your own interest that you spend the best part of your wealth, the better part of your wealth, especially when you're giving something in kind. And then the Quran says, الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤت الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا فما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب. Satan scares you of poverty and tempts you to spend on lewd things, and God from His own self promises you His forgiveness and His bounty, and God is very munificent and all-knowing. He, according to His law, gives an awareness of this promise to whomsoever He pleases, and he who received this awareness indeed received a treasure of abundant good. Yet none but men of wisdom receive a reminder from such things. So you see, another thing which is now presented before people, again, which can become a pitfall for charity and charitable behavior, is that Satan scares you of poverty and tempts you to spend on lewd things. So one of the weapons that Satan has, one of the onslaughts that he launches when he sees people being generous, he says that, well, if you start spending, one day you'll become a poor pauper yourself. Why do you have such a generous behavior? You should hold back a lot of wealth for your own self. There should be some wealth for your rainy day. And this is how he tempts you to be stingy, to hold back wealth. And at exactly this point, the Quran says that you must be very, very aware of this fact, that Satan, he threatens you, he scares you and frightens you, that if you start spending like this, you'll just end up with nothing at all. Whereas you have to remember that when God accepts this charity, when you are able to be given this opportunity and therefore you spend for the cause of God, then He is going to return it to you in a very, very huge manner, in a magnanimous way, in something that you cannot even imagine. So that is why it is said that as far as God is concerned, Wallahu ya'idukum maghfiratum minhu fazla. So as far as God is concerned, He promised you, see, His forgiveness and His bounty, and God is very munificent and all-knowing. So Satan promises you and scares you of poverty, and he asks you to spend on, in the first place, to not spend at all, and if you have to spend, then to spend on lewd things. But look at God. He says, He calls you towards forgiveness. And how should you earn that forgiveness? By realizing that this charity is not going to make you poor at all. If anything, it's going to make you rich, because that charity that you spend for the cause of God is going to be returned to you manyfold, manyfold. You just cannot even imagine the reward that you're going to reap as a result. So just ignore these advices and these suggestions of Satan, because Satan has made up his mind to lead mankind astray from time immemorial. The very time that he was created, the very time that he gave this challenge to the Almighty, he is after mankind. He would like the majority of mankind to end up in hell. So it gives all sorts of evil suggestions, and one of them is mentioned here, that you spend on lewd things, spend on things which are proscribed, spend on things which are lustful or vulgar. And the Almighty, on the other hand, has a totally different approach. And then the Quran says this is the wisdom. And when God gives you this wisdom, then you are really blessed. And what is that wisdom? The wisdom, of course, is that spending in the cause of God is not going to make you a poor person. If anything, it's going to make you affluent, rich, wealthy, because that is how the Almighty has destined your wealth to be, that if you're given wealth, then He's testing you whether you share this wealth with other people or not. So Satan would not want this to happen, and therefore he scares you with all his might to stop spending. And if ever to spend, then to spend on vulgar things. So viewers, I'm going to stop here for some time, and if you have any questions up to what we have now studied, please raise them, and then inshallah we'll move forward.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Walaikum assalam.
डॉक्टर साहब, ये जो अभी आपने अल्लाह की राह में खर्च करने की बात की, बहुत नाजुक मामला बाज़ दफ़ा इस तरह हो जाता है कि जैसे फैमिली में अगर कोई मेंबर होता है, उसकी जॉब चली जाती है, बिजनेस में लॉस हो जाता है, बिजनेस लूज कर बैठता है या जॉब चली जाती है, और होता ही है कि सब मिलजुल कर उसको खड़ा करने की कोशिश करते हैं, लेकिन वो बहुत एक लंबा टाइम गुजर जाता है। बाज़ दफ़ा ऐसा लगता है कि जो कुछ भी वो कर रहा है, मतलब वो बर्बाद हो रहा है, उसमें खराबी हो, तो होता ही है कि लोग फिर उसको अपनी तरफ खींचना शुरू कर देते हैं कि ये करो, ये बिजनेस करो, ये जॉब करो, तुमने हमारी बात नहीं सुनी। तो उसको प्रेशराइज करने लगते हैं, और उसको ये महसूस होने लगता है कि शायद ये मुझे जता रहे हैं। तो वो फैमिली मेंबर्स कहते हैं कि हम तुम्हें जता नहीं रहे, बल्कि हम तुम्हारी मदद करना चाह रहे हैं। तो ये बड़ा नाजुक मामला होता है। तो इसमें क्या करना चाहिए कि या तो उसकी मदद करते रहने चाहिए, या फिर इस तरह की बातें नहीं करनी चाहिए जो उसको महसूस हो कि ये जता रहे हैं।
देखिए, आपको तो ये देखना चाहिए कि आप असल में सजेशन की जगह पे खड़े हुए हैं। आप किसी पर, आपकी ज़िम्मेदारी ये नहीं है कि ज़बरदस्ती किसी को एक तरफ लगाएं। वो जो शख्स है, वो सोचने समझने वाला शख्स है, वो अपनी ज़िंदगी के बारे में फ़ैसला ख़ुद करना चाहिए उसको, और उसमें गलती भी वो कर सकते हैं। कि वो लोग जो उनकी मदद कर रहे हैं, उनके लिए इतना ही काफ़ी है कि वो मदद करके ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा एक तजवीज़ दे दें। लेकिन अगर वो ज़बरदस्ती करेंगे या अपनी मनमानी करने की कोशिश करेंगे, तो ये फिर उस बंदे की इज़्ज़त नफ्स पे भी असर पड़ेगा, और वो अपनी जो उसकी कारकर्दगी है उस पर भी असर पड़ेगा। तो आपका काम तो ये है कि आपने, अगर किसी का नुकसान हुआ है, उसको पूरा करने के लिए आप उसको कोई माली इमदाद कर रहे हैं, तो उसी असूल पे माली इमदाद कीजिए कि जो नुकसान हुआ है वो उसको आप पूरा कर दें। और अगर कोई कारोबारी तौर पे आप चाहते हैं कि उसको कोई बेहतर अपॉर्चुनिटी में असर आए, तो ये सोच के कि भाई वो एक सोचने समझने वाला आदमी है जो अपने फ़ैसले करने में आज़ाद है, वो आपसे मशवरा आप अगर दे रहे हैं तो वो हो सकता है आपसे मशवरा आपको एक्सेप्ट करे या ना करे। लेकिन बहरहाल आपकी ज़िम्मेदारी यही है कि खैर खाई से जो आप बात कहें, उसके बाद पीछे हट जाएँ। यानी अपनी बात को इब्राम से या अपनी बात को शिद्दत से जब आप पेश करेंगे या मनवाएंगे, तो उसके नतीजे में उसके लिए वो जैसे कहते हैं ना कि ज़िंदगी थोड़ी तंग होनी शुरू हो जाएगी। तो ये एहसान जताने के ज़ुमरे में तो नहीं आएगा ये कुछ, लेकिन बहरहाल ये भी कोई अच्छा रवैया नहीं है कि आप एक तो दे रहे हैं और ऊपर से आप चाह ही रहे हैं कि वो दूसरा आदमी भी वही करे जो आप कहते हैं। तो इसमें भी यही करना चाहिए कि आप अगर देना चाहते हैं तो ज़रूर दें, लेकिन दूसरे आदमी को मौका दें, क्योंकि फ़ैसला उसने करना है कि वो फ़ैसला करे।
So, Dr. Saleem, I have a question. So, this is basically this is just about charity. It has nothing to do with zakat. So, for people who pay the right portion of zakat from their wealth, this charity is, of course, a different kind of charity. It's just sadaqah or khairat. This is what
Right.
the reference to is. So, what is the bearing of, if you give your zakat completely, what is the bearing of charity like this one? Is it obligatory or is it a choice?
So you see, just as when we pray, we have the mandatory rakats of the prayer and we have the nafals. The mandatory ones are the ones that we have to pray come what may. And and above those mandatory rakat, it's entirely up to us what we can present to God. So in a very similar way, the mandatory part of charity is called zakat. I mean, that is something that we have to pay at all cost. Anything above zakat is optional. It's going to earn a lot of reward, and it is something of a directive that you have to obey. But just as optional rakat of the prayer, they are not mandatory. Similarly, zakat, which is over and above charity, cannot be termed mandatory in the sense that we term zakat to be mandatory. But it is a very, very highly recommended thing that over and above your zakat, whatever you have, you look for people in the society that you live in. If they need, if in spite of giving zakat to the society, if there are still people who are in need and you also are in a position to give, then there is another directive of religion which is called infaq, which means to spend in charity, and that is that anything which is beyond your personal and your business needs, whether it belongs to your present or your future, anything which is more than that, the Quran says it is the right of the society. It is something that you owe as an obligation to the society. But of course, as I said, your personal needs and your trade needs, whether they belong to the present or to the future, once you have taken care of all them, then whatever remains is basically the right of the society. You might not immediately dispense it because you don't have deserving people at hand, but then you must always keep it ready that whenever someone comes to you who is in need, then you will make it available for them. So now we move on to verse 270 and onwards. وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُهُ وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ. Understand this thing and rest assured that whatever you spend or whatever vows you make, you shall definitely be rewarded for it, because God is fully aware of it. And those who turn away from this guidance of God and are unjust to their souls shall have none to help them in the presence of God. So again, this is one thing which is mentioned further, that whatever you spend, if you spend something which is not known to people, or if you make a vow, which means vows we all know, or nazars we all know, was not the part, or the you can say a very, very part and parcel of the lives of the Prophet and the companions, because we find very seldom mention of this in their lives. Of course, it was part of the Arabian society and the pre-Islamic Arabian society, in which people would make a vow that, well, if God grants them a certain wish, then in return for that, they will do a certain good deed. But as I said, that it seems that as the Quran was revealed and it went on, this was something that was marginalized. But the Quran still says that whatever you spend, and at the same time, whatever vow you make, don't think that if it is made in your own personal intention or your own heart, and whatever you spend is done so that no one notices it, but don't think that it is not in the notice of God. God has complete knowledge of whatever you spend in a private way, in a way that no one can see that spending. But remember, God is fully aware of that spending, and similarly the vows that you make, and as a result of which you promise that you would do a certain good deed, God is fully aware of that. So at the same time, it is also like a warning that if you've made this commitment to do a certain good deed, that you would do as a result, if certain things would be achieved. And again, this is something for which you are liable to, and God is watching over you in this regard. And وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ, and it says that and those who turn away from this guidance of God and are unjust to their souls shall have none to help them. وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ, in the presence of God, which means that people who are unjust to themselves, people who, in spite of making a commitment, they do not honor that commitment in charity, then remember that God does not like such people, and these are people who shall not have anyone to help them in the hereafter. And then it goes on, in tubdu sadaqati fa ni'immahi wa in tukhfuha wa tu'tuha al-fuqara fa huwa khairul lakum wa yukaffiru ankum min sayyi'atikum wallahu bima ta'maluna khabir. If you spend your charity openly, then what a good thing this is. But if you hide it and give it to the poor, then this is better for you. God will reward you for this and will brush away many of your sins from you. And in reality, God has full knowledge of whatever you do. So again, now further guidance is given. So this is like a whole, I would say, group of verses in which several guidance points, in the form of bullet points, if you can say, they are given. These are some of the pitfalls in charity are given, that you should not show off your charity, you should not remind people of your graciousness, that you were your graciousness to them in the past. And at the same time, it is also said that you must spend of your pure wealth. You must not spend on wealth which is worthless, something that you would not even accept for your own self. And now another thing is being said to us, and that is that if you spend in charity, then it is better that you spend it secretly. I mean, the Quran says, yes, it is fine if you spend it openly, but spending it in secrecy is much better. وَإِن تُخْفُوهَا وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاءَ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. So if you give it in private to people who are needy, it is better for you. And what will happen as a result? The Quran says that when you spend in charity in a secret way, so that no one knows what good deed you have done, yukaffir ankum min sayyiatikum. The Almighty is going to brush away your minor sins from you. So your charity is going to become an atonement for your sins. Now, there could be instances in which you would like your charity to be known to other people, and I think that is why precisely the Quran has said that you can spend your charity openly and you can spend it secretly as well, but secretly spending is much better. Now, as far as openly spending your charity is concerned, to my mind, a very pertinent example is that when you would like to inspire your own children, for example, or some of your near ones, that they should also partake in this noble deed, then at times you do something in front of them so that they get inspired, and so that they also develop this habit of spending in the way of God. So for this, of course, you'll have to spend in front of them so that they can take notice of it. If you do it secretly, it will not come to their notice. So it seems that when the Quran says that you can spend it openly, it is actually not referring to the fact that you should spend it by bringing it into people's knowledge as if you are boasting about it. But the purpose is that if you are spending it openly or in publicly, then it must have a very specific purpose. It should not be a means of show off. It should be a means of inspiration for other people. Wallahu bima ta'maluna khabir. God has full knowledge of whatever you do. So whether you're boasting when you're spending openly, or whether your purpose is to inspire the people, it might be something that people might not notice, but God full knows your intention, whether you are spending to make people, to make them know how generous you are, or whether your purpose of spending publicly is that they also get inspired. So don't think that you can fool God. You must know that God has knowledge of your own intentions. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّى إِلَيْكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُظْلَمُونَ. If the Israelites do not believe a prophet, it is not your responsibility to give them guidance. In fact, it is God who alone gives guidance in accordance with His law to whomsoever He wills. Believers, you should, however, understand that whatever wealth you spend shall earn you only its benefit, and you are in fact spending it to please God, and for this objective, whatever you spend shall be repaid to you in full on the day of judgment, and nothing at all shall be taken from what you have earned. Now, this is a very important verse which actually tells the Ishmaelites. Remember this surah, which is Surah Baqarah, which that was revealed in Medina, this is basically the first part, especially the first half of the surah, is addressed to the Jews, to the Israelites, and a whole chart sheet of their misgivings, of their misdemeanor, of the of the commitments that they broke with God. It is enlisted. If you recall our earlier sessions, you will see how they have been pointed out that they were given this responsibility of conveying the message of God and at the same time also being just and truthful, and how they floundered these responsibilities, and they ended up not only forsaking them, but they ended up doing things that were despicable, like entering into, in the arena of polytheism. So the Quran has made this very clear that now they are deposed from this position, and the Ishmaelites, of course, the followers of the Prophet and he himself, they are now being given this position of delivering the truth to other nations of the world. So it is in this background that this verse is actually telling the Ishmaelites that if the Israelites do not believe a prophet, it is not your responsibility. Your responsibility, if you have come to them. So remember that the Israelites, the Jews especially, their own scriptures, they predicted the arrival of the last prophet of God. It had the prophecy in them that a final prophet will come to them. And we know from Surah Araf that the prophet's name was mentioned in their book. So he was mentioned by name. So the words are Yajidunahu indahum maktubun fat Tawrati wal Injil. So they found his name written in their own books, that this is the last prophet who is going to come. And now, in spite of that, they should have been the first to welcome the prophet. But instead of being the first to welcome him, they ended up being the first to reject him. So the Quran now says that you have done what was needed to be done. You have done enough. You just cannot guide them unless they have the will to be guided. You cannot force them to guidance. So just forget about him. Laysa alaykum hudahum walakin Allah yahdi man yasha. As far as guidance is concerned, you cannot make them accept guidance. Only God is someone who makes people accept guidance. But then He also has His law, and that is people who duly revere, duly respect being guided, they are given guidance. People who do not have any worth for guidance, God does not want them to be guided, and as a result, they are punished in this form, and instead of being guided, they are left to go astray. So the Quran says, وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ. So remember, what you're going to spend is for your own cause, and whatever you're going to spend, وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ, that should be spent purely for the cause of God. Your objective of spending must be to please God, nothing else. No show off, nothing, anything which is contrary to this intention is not acceptable to God. You have to spend it, as the Quran says, ibtigha'a wajhillah, which means to seek the pleasure of the Almighty. And وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّى إِلَيْكُمْ. So remember, whatever you're going to spend is going to return to you, and you shall not be wronged in any way. So once again, the charity, the commands for charity, this inspiration and this appeal to take on this very, very noble gesture is something which the Quran has continued in these verses. And I can tell you that if you are able to grasp the language directly from its origin, instead of depending on a translation, these words have tremendous power and they have tremendous appeal in them. And the way they find their root in our heart is something which is hard to describe, the way these words are found in these verses. And then the Quran says, لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الَّذِينَ أُحْصِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ ضَرْبًا فِي الْأَرْضِ يَحْسَبُهُمُ الْجَاهِلُ أَغْنِيَاءَ مِنَ التَّعَفُّفِ تَعْرِفُهُمْ بِسِيمَاهُمْ لَا يَسْأَلُونَ النَّاسَ إِلْحَافًا وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. This is specifically for the poor who are stranded in the cause of God and who are not able to make effort in the land to earn their livelihood. The ignorant take them for men of wealth on account of their self-honor. You can recognize them by their faces. They are not insistent in begging from people. Help them and understand that whatever you spend for this objective shall necessarily earn reward for you, because it is fully known to God. Now you find another category of directives, again something which relate to charity being specially given here. And we have to understand that as far as the Quran is concerned, when it makes this point, it has to have very, very special ring to it. And it says that this charity is meant specially for people who are stranded in the cause of God, who cannot make their ends meet for themselves. They are ones who are not going to come to you. They are not going to come to you for their own needs, because they have this self-esteem. But the Quran says, يَحْسَبُهُمُ الْجَاهِلْ أَغْنِيَاءَ مِنَ التَّعَفُّفِ. A person who is not unaware of them, who is not fully aware of them, he would think that, well, this person is quite a well-off person. But if you look behind them, you'll find that person who might be appearing very well set, someone who is well dressed, but in spite of that, he is a person who is in a spot of bother. He needs your help. But his self-esteem is something which does not let him beg from you. So the Quran says, La yas'alun nasa ilhafa. These are the people who do not come to you and are insistent in their begging. For those who do, they are professional beggars. So the Quran is actually pointing out people who are really in need. It says that these are people who are not insistent at all. They would rather sleep empty stomach at night than come and beg for you for food. So the responsibility that the Quran has given us is to reach out to these people, because they are not going to come to you. You need to go out to them. And you have to be also very, very perspicacious. You must have that insight, because from the apparent things, or from their appearance, they will look as if they are well off. But if you look at them more closely, you will find that they are in need. So the Quran says that specially look towards these people who would not come to you, but you need to go to themselves. And then it says, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Those who spend their wealth in the way of God by day and by night, in private and in public, have their reward with their Lord, and for them there shall be no fear there, nor shall they be sorrowful. Now, viewers, once more, another very important thing is mentioned regarding charity. So remember, these verses that we are studying, they have a very, very special message for us, and these are the norms of charitability, how to be a charitable person, what to avoid and what not to avoid. And now comes the final thing which is mentioned here, and that is, these are people who spend by day and night, al-layli wan-nahar. Now this phrase does not mean that they spend day and night, or they spend at night and day. What it means is that they don't wait for opportunities to present themselves. They create opportunities. So it's like saying they spend all the time. When I say that he's doing this day and night, in the English idiom, it does not mean that he is just going to do it by day or by night. It actually is an all-embracing sentence, which means that he is always doing that thing. When I say that this person is doing this thing day and night, I'm not referring to day and night individually. I'm actually saying that he's doing this all the time. So this is what the Quran wants us. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ سِرًّا وَالنَّهَارِ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً, that who spend in private and public by day and night, which means at all times. They are looking for opportunities in which they could go and find out where they can spend their wealth. So they don't wait for opportunities to come to them. They go to those places or opportunities where they think that they can really spend their wealth. This is such a beautiful advice which the Quran says, and such an inspirational, I would say these are inspirational words from the Quran, that basically as individuals, we need to understand that we need to create opportunities to spend on other people. We need to find out those people by going to those people. And if we have an eye, and if we have the proper training and grooming in this regard, it is not difficult at all. People who are in dire need might be right under our nose. They might be right near us. And it is we who need to spot them. It is we who must create that opportunity. It is we who need to go and ask them, so that their own self-esteem is not at all sacrificed. So viewers, with this we come to this end of this session. I'm not going to go further in the verses that remain. Inshallah, we'll study in our next session next week. So if you have any questions regarding what we have studied today, we'll take them up, and once those are finished, then we can take up general questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Waalaikumsalam.
So 270 or 272 and 3, I can see that there's some conflict because in 270, let's say you can make vow, but if you do make a vow, you fulfill it. And then
Yes.
further on down, Allah says spend unconditionally, just to please God. So do not put any conditions on it. So how
Right.
would we justify that? Like people, a lot of people say, okay, I'll do this much charity if Allah Ta'ala does this favor for me. I'll spend,
Right.
I'll do this much rakat
Right.
if this
Right.
happens. So how
I,
would we?
I actually I did explain this while I was discussing these verses, that basically this was a form of worship that existed in pre-Islamic Arabia, that people would make vows that they will do Hajj if such and such thing happens, or they will go barefooted for Hajj. So there were all sorts of vows that people would make, and that is why the Quran has mentioned them. But if you study the life of the Prophet himself and the companions, and from other portions of the Quran, you will find that this part of the worship, or this form of worship, fell into disuse, or it was not very much in use in the times of the Prophet. Although it was there, but it was seldom employed as a ritual of worship. So, of course, that was a commitment that you make with God, and God says that once you make a commitment, so because you're vowing for something, you are promising the Almighty. The Quran says that you have to fulfill that promise. This does not in any way be in conflict with this word that when that you spend unconditionally. These are two separate things. The Quran only says that when you make a condition, that you must fulfill it, but the recommendation is that you do not do so, and it's that you do it without any condition. But if you have made a condition, then the Quran says that you must fulfill it. So these are two parallel things. They do not negate one another. So in other words, the Quran wants you to do it unconditionally. However, if you impose a condition, then the Quran says that this is like a commitment that you make to God, and therefore you must fulfill it.
Jazakallah
Thank you
khair.
so much. Shabana Ansari, please ask your question. Unmute your mic.
جی ڈاکٹر صاحب ہمارے یہاں جو ایک مسکنسیپشن زکوٰۃ کے بارے میں کہ وہ بہن بھائیوں کو نہیں دی جا سکتی، وہ ایسے لوگوں کو نہیں دی جا سکتی جن کے پاس زیورات ہیں، جن کا گھر ہے، یا کوئی جو اس طرح کے لگتے نہیں ہیں دیکھنے میں. تو ہوتا یہ کہ عام طور پہ لوگ مانگنے والوں کو یا میڈس کو جو ویسے بھی مانگ رہی ہوتی ہیں، ان کو تو ایک بڑی اماؤنٹ ہوتی ہے عام طور پہ زکوٰۃ کی لوگوں کے پاس، ان کو دے دیتے ہیں. لیکن جو لوگ نہیں مانگ رہے ہوتے اور جو سفید پوش ہوتے ہیں، وہ اسی طرح بےچارے رہ جاتے ہیں، اور وہ بڑی بڑی زکوٰۃیں جو کیونکہ ان کے پاس زیور ہے، کیونکہ وہ گھر میں رہتے ہیں، لیکن ان کی مجبوری کوئی نہیں دیکھتا، اور اتنی بڑی اماؤنٹ عام طور پہ وہ صدقات میں نکال بھی نہیں پاتے. تو یہ مسکنسیپشن ہمارا ختم ہی نہیں ہو رہا کہ زکوٰۃ دی جا سکتی ہے بہن بھائیوں کو بھی.
جی بالکل. دیکھیں، زکوٰۃ کا تعلق ضروریات سے ہے. وہ ضروریات کسی کی بھی ہو سکتی ہیں، وہ بہن بھائی بھی ہو سکتے ہیں، وہ ماں باپ بھی ہو سکتے ہیں، وہ اولاد بھی ہو سکتی ہے. تو زکوٰۃ کا تعلق تو ضرورت سے ہے. آپ اگر کسی کی ضرورت کو پورا کر رہے ہیں اور جس کو دے رہے ہیں وہ مستحق ہے، وہ ضرورت مند ہے، تو ضرورت مند کو کلاسیفائی نہیں کیا گیا کہ وہ فلاں فلاں ہونا چاہیے تو وہ ضرورت مند ہوگا. ضرورت مند جیسے ہم نے زکوٰۃ کی جب آیتیں میں نے پڑھائی ہیں، جب ہم نے میرے خیال ہے ہم نے جب اس کو پڑھا ہے ڈیٹیل میں اکنامک شریعہ کو، تو اس میں آپ یہ دیکھیے کہ یہ بتایا گیا ہے کہ سورہ توبہ کی جو 60th ورس ہے، اس کے اندر جو ہیڈز آف زکوٰۃ ہیں وہ مینشنڈ ہیں کہ جو جن پہ آپ خرچ کر سکتے ہیں. اس میں اس طرح کی کوئی ڈسٹنکشن نہیں ہے. اس میں یہ بات کہ اگر لوگوں کے پاس زیور ہے اور وہ اس کے باوجود مستحق ہو سکتے ہیں، تو اس میں کوئی مذائقہ، مطلب اس پہ کوئی چیز مانے نہیں ہے. یعنی زیور ہونا اس کے خلاف نہیں ہے کہ آپ ضرورت مند ہیں. بعض دفعہ زیور انسان کے پاس ہوتا ہے، لیکن وہ ضرورت کے لیے رکھا نہیں گیا ہوتا، بلکہ اپنے بچوں کے لیے آئندہ ضرورت کے لیے رکھا گیا ہوتا ہے. تو محض اس وجہ سے کسی کو مستحق نہ قرار دینا کہ وہ چونکہ زیور ان کے پاس ہے، یہ تو صرف ایک منطق ہے جو ہم نے ایجاد کر لی ہے. ادروائز ضرورت کا مطلب یہی ہے کہ آپ کی جو بنیادی ضروریات ہیں وہ پوری نہیں ہو پا رہی ہیں، خواہ آپ کے پاس کچھ ایسٹس موجود ہوں، اس لیے کہ آپ ہر وقت تو ایسٹس بیچ نہیں رہے ہوتے، چاہے وہ زیور ہوں چاہے وہ کوئی اور پراپرٹی ہو. تو اس وجہ سے یہاں ضرورت کا جو تعین ہے یہ ایک بڑی سبجیکٹیو چیز ہے، یہ ایک تھوڑی سی سٹل چیز بھی ہے، تھوڑی سی لطیف بھی ہے. وہ ضرورت کو ہمیں سامنے رکھنا چاہیے. اس میں چیزیں تعلیم کی نوعیت کی ہیں، اس میں صحت کی نوعیت کی ہیں، اس میں کھانے کا خرچ ہے، اس میں ظاہر ہے کہ کپڑے وغیرہ کا ہے، اس میں چھت ہے. یعنی اب جو بیسک ضروریات ہیں وہ جب بھی کسی کی پوری نہیں ہو رہی ہیں تو وہ ضرورت مند کہلائے گا.
اصل میں ہمارے روایتی علماء کا جو فتویٰ ہے وہ کچھ اسی قسم کا ہے، تو لوگ اس نظریے سے نکل ہی نہیں پا رہے ہیں عام طور پہ.
ہاں دیکھیے جی، ہمارا کام تو یہ ہے کہ جو ہم جس بات کو صحیح سمجھتے ہیں اس کو استدلال سے بیان کر دیں. لوگوں کی ذمہ داری اللہ تعالیٰ نے ہم پہ نہیں ڈالی ہے. لوگوں کی ذمہ داری یہ ہے کہ وہ بھی اپنے طور پہ سچ کو تلاش کریں، اور جس سچ کو سچ سمجھتے ہیں وہ اسی کے لحاظ سے زندگی گزاریں.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Saima Khan, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
السلام علیکم. میرا کوشچن جو ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ لوگ جو زکوٰۃ اور فطرے زکوٰۃ ہیں، بھی جو فلسطین کے اندر جنگ چل رہی ہے، زیادہ تر لوگوں نے اپنے، جب میرے کافی جاننے والوں نے وہاں پر اپنا جو ہے وہ ڈونیٹ کیا، جبکہ ہمارے مسلمان ملکوں میں بہت سارے لوگ ہیں جو بغیر جنگ کے حالت جنگ میں رہ رہے ہیں، ان کے پاس کھانے پینے کو نہیں ہے، ان کے بیسک نیڈس اینڈ نیسیسٹیز نہیں ہے، مگر وہ اتنا ہائپ کریٹ کیا ہوا ہے فلسطین کا کہ لوگ بغیر کچھ سوچے سمجھے اپنی ساری زکوٰۃ اور صدقات جو ہے وہ وہاں بھیج رہے ہیں. تو قرآن اس بارے میں ہمیں کیا گائیڈ کرتا ہے؟
دیکھیے قرآن مجید نے میں نے ابھی آپ کو بتایا، اگر آپ سورہ توبہ کی 60th ورس کو دیکھیں جس میں انہوں نے ہیڈز آف زکوٰۃ بیان کر دی ہیں، تو وہ سارے ہیڈز موجود ہیں. اصل میں تو دیکھیے زکوٰۃ کی جو ڈسپرسمنٹ ہے وہ ایک ریاست کی ذمہ داری ہے. یعنی ہمیں تو زکوٰۃ دینی ہے ریاست کو، ریاست پھر یہ دیکھتی ہے کہ ان سائڈ اٹس اون اسٹیٹ اور آؤٹ سائڈ اگر کوئی ضرورت ہے امت کی کسی بہت ہی بین الاقوامی مسئلے میں وہ کیا کر سکتی ہے. تو اسلام نے تو ہمیں جو تعلیم دی ہے، چونکہ ہم اولین اس پہ عمل ہی نہیں کر رہے، ہم تو خود چونکہ ایک اجتماعی ذمہ داری کو ادا کر رہے ہیں جو کہ ہماری ذمہ داری اصل میں نہیں ہے. یعنی اسلام کا قانون یہ ہے کہ زکوٰۃ کو یا صدقات کو ریاست کے بیت المال میں جمع کرایا جاتا ہے. اس کے بعد ریاست کیا کرتی ہے کہ ان پیسوں سے اسٹیٹ کو بھی چلاتی ہے اور آپ کی اسٹیٹ کو ایک ویلفیئر اسٹیٹ بناتی ہے، آپ کی ساری ضروریات بھی پورا کرتی ہے. وہ لوگ جو زندگی کی دوڑ میں پیچھے رہ گئے ہیں ان کی بھی کفالت کرتی ہے. اور اگر اس کے بعد سرپلس بچ جائے تو کوئی بین الاقوامی ایشو ہے تو اس کی طرف بھی وہ رجوع کرتی ہے. یہ اس وقت جو آپ سمجھ لیجیے جو پرسکرائب نظام اسلام کا وہ یہ ہے. اس وقت سچویشن یہ ہے کہ ریاست اس سے بے خبر ہے کہ اس کی ذمہ داری ہے زکوٰۃ کو کلیکٹ کرنا، اس کو ڈسپرس کرنا. یہ ایک چیز ایسی ہے جو ہمارے نگاہوں سے اوجھل ہے. تو جب یہ چیز ہی اوجھل ہو گئی ہے تو اب پھر لوگ آزاد ہیں، وہ انڈیویجولی فیصلے کر رہے ہوتے ہیں. جیسے آپ نے کہا ہائپ کریٹ کر دی جاتی ہے تو وہ سمجھتے ہیں کہ ان کی ذمہ داری ہے کہ وہاں وہ پہنچائیں. تو اب ہر فرد اپنی انڈیویجول کیپیسٹی میں ڈیسائیڈ کرے گا. ظاہر ہے کہ ایک مت جو بیان ہوئی ہے زکوٰۃ میں وہ یہ ہے فی سبیل اللہ، جس کا مطلب ہے کہ اللہ کی راہ میں اگر کوئی جنگ ہو رہی ہو یا اللہ کی راہ میں اگر کوئی معاملہ ایسا ہو رہا ہو جس میں لوگوں کو پیسوں کی ضرورت ہو تو یہ مت تو وہاں موجود ہے. تو یہ فیصلہ فرد ہی کر سکتے ہیں کہ بھئی یہ جو پیسے وہ بھیج رہے ہیں یہ کس حد تک وہاں پہنچ بھی رہے ہیں کہ نہیں پہنچ رہے، اور اگر پہنچ رہے ہیں تو کس کو کن تک پہنچ رہے ہیں. تو مطلب یہ ایک انڈیویجول فیصلہ ہے کہ جو صحیح بھی ہو سکتا ہے غلط بھی ہو سکتا ہے. لیکن جیسے میں نے کہا کہ اگر ترتیب وہ ہو جو ہمیں مذہب نے بتائی ہے کہ ریاست کو یہ دیا جائے گا اور ریاست پہلے اپنے اندرونی جو ضروریات کو پورا کرے گی، اور پھر اگر کوئی سرپلس ہوتا ہے تو وہ انٹرنیشنل کنسورشیم کوئی بنا سکتی ہے یا کوئی ایک میوچل فنڈ بنا سکتی ہے جس میں وہ پھر بین الاقوامی چیزوں کی امداد کی ضرورت ہے اسے پوری کرے. لیکن چونکہ وہ ہو نہیں رہا تو اب پھر لشٹم پشٹم لوگ اپنی اپنی آراء کے لحاظ سے یہ کام کر رہے ہیں.
تھینک یو.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Saleem, there are no more subject-related questions right now. Can I open the floor for general questions then?
یس جی بالکل.
Muhammad Alian, please go ahead and ask your general question. Muhammad Alian, are you there to ask your question? If you can unmute your mic. We cannot hear you. Okay, we'll come back to you. Nogair 20, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
ڈاکٹر صاحب میرا ایک سوال ہے، یہ کنفیوژن سی ہے. دیکھیں آپ فرض کریں میں آپ سے بات کرتا ہوں کہ آپ نے تدبر قرآن پہ آپ یو آر سیٹسفائیڈ نہ ہو. اچھا اب آپ اگر سیٹسفائیڈ ہو گئے البیان پہ سیٹسفائیڈ ہو گئے، اس کا مطلب ہے آپ قرآن کہتا ہے کہ تدبر کریں، اب آپ اور کیا تدبر کریں گے بتائیں.
نہیں دیکھیں میں تو اب کسی چیز پہ سیٹسفائیڈ نہیں ہوں. میرا کام تو یہ ہے کہ میں سچ کی تلاش میں ہمیشہ سے لگا رہا ہوں. جب بھی کوئی سوال پیدا ہوگا میرے اپنے ذہن کا یا میرے سوسائٹی کا یا میرے سے کوئی پوچھے گا تو میں دیکھوں گا کہ میرا موجودہ علم کیا کہتا ہے. اس موجودہ علم کو میں اس کو میں کنسلٹ کروں گا. لیکن ہو سکتا ہے کہ اس موجودہ علم پر مجھے اطمینان نہ ہو، یعنی اطمینان ہو جائے گا تو میں جواب دوں گا، نہیں اطمینان ہوگا تو میں مزید سرچ کروں گا یا مزید کوئی رائے قائم کروں گا. تو یہ تو سفر ہے جو مجھے موت تک جاری رکھنا ہے. میں کسی ایک چیز پر قانع ہو کے مطمئن ہو کے نہیں بیٹھ سکتا. اگر کوئی چیز مجھے بادر کرے گی تو مجھے اس کو حل کرنے کی تلاش میں دوبارہ نکلنا ہے. ہاں اگر اس کا جواب مجھے پہلے سے موجود کسی سورس سے مل جاتا ہے تو میں اس پہ مطمئن ہو جاؤں گا. نہیں ملتا تو مجھے تلاش کرتے رہنا ہے اور یا کچھ اپنی رائے خود قائم کرنی ہے.
نہیں آپ کو سوال نہیں ہے، آپ موجودہ قرآن کے تدبر سے آر یو سیٹسفائیڈ نہ ہو.
نہیں آپ بات کر رہے ہیں مسلمانوں کی بات کر رہے ہیں
یا میں اپنی بات کر رہا ہوں کہ میں فرض کروں میں آپ تدبر قرآن سے میں سیٹسفائیڈ ہوں، میں البیان سے سیٹسفائیڈ ہوں، مجھے سارے اس کے جو اس کی کمنٹری لکھی ہوئی ہے میں اس پہ سیٹسفائیڈ ہوں. تو اب میرا تدبر یہاں پہ اب ختم ہو گیا کہ مجھے اور تدبر
نہیں، آپ کا تو ختم نہیں ہونا چاہیے. دیکھیں سیٹسفائیڈ آپ اس لیے ہیں کہ کوئی نیا سوال پیدا نہیں ہوگا. جو بھی کس وقت دنیا میں کام ہو رہا ہے چاہے وہ تدبر قرآن ہو، تفہیم القرآن ہو، البیان، وہ انسانی کام ہے. وہ پرفیکٹ ہو ہی نہیں سکتا. اس میں کوئی غلطی ہونے کا امکان پورا موجود ہے. کل کو کوئی سوال آپ کے ذہن میں پیدا ہو سکتا ہے، کل کوئی آپ کا دوست آپ سے سوال پوچھ سکتا ہے جس کا جواب آپ کو ان سورسز میں نہیں ملے یا کسی اور سورس سے مل جائے. تو اس وجہ سے آپ کو تو کبھی بھی مطمئن نہیں ہونا چاہیے. اگر مطمئن کا مطلب صرف یہ ہوتا ہے کہ اس انٹل دیٹ ٹائم کوئی آپ کے ذہن میں سوال ایسا نہیں ہے کہ جو ان کو آپ کو اس سورسز پہ نہ ملا ہو. لیکن اس کی کوئی گارنٹی تو نہیں ہے کہ آپ نیکسٹ ڈے آپ اٹھیں, آپ کے اندر ذہن میں کوئی سوال پیدا ہو جائے, آپ ان سورسز کو رجوع کریں, آپ کو معلوم ہو کہ یہ سیٹسفیکٹری جواب نہیں دے رہی ہیں, تو آپ کسی اور چوتھی سورس کو رجوع کرتے ہیں, کسی اور اسکالر سے کنسلٹ کرتے ہیں. یہ تو ہماری ذمہ داری ہے ایز مسلمز بھی اور ایز سیکرز آف دا ٹروتھ, کہ سچائی کی تلاش ایک ایسا سفر ہے جو تا قیامت جاری رہے گا, ہماری اپنی موت تک جاری رہے گا. یہ اطمینان صرف ایک وقتی اطمینان ہوتا ہے, یعنی اس وقت تک سوال چونکہ پیدا نہیں ہوا, آپ نے فلاں عالم پر اطمینان کیا ہوا ہے, آپ سیٹسفائیڈ ہیں تو آپ مطمئن ہیں, لیکن یہ رہنا نہیں چاہیے ایسے.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. Muhammad Alian Siddiqui, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you. Let me unmute this.
السلام علیکم.
وعلیکم السلام.
سر میرا سوال یہ تھا, میں تھوڑا ڈیٹیل میں جاننا چاہ رہا تھا کہ جو 12 امام ہے اہل بیت یہ کون ہے اور ان کا اسلام میں کیا رول ہے, کیا مرتبہ ہے, کیا مقام ہے؟ تھینک یو.
دیکھیں یہ تو اثنا عشری جو شیعہ ہیں, اثنا عشری کا مطلب ہے 12 کو ماننے والے, وہ یہ 12 امام ہی کو مانتے ہیں. ان کا یہ خیال ہے کہ یہ جو ائمہ ہیں یہ معصومین ہیں. معصومین کا مطلب ہے ان سے خطا نہیں ہوتی, اور ان کو وہ تقریباً وہی درجہ دیتے ہیں جو نبوت کا درجہ ہے, اور یہ کہتے ہیں کہ یہ براہ راست اللہ تعالیٰ سے پاتے ہیں اور ان سے کوئی خطا نہیں ہوتی. تو یہ ایک عقیدہ ہے کہ جو اہل تشیع میں سے جو اثنا عشری شیعہ ہیں ان کا ہے. جہاں تک میں سمجھاؤں کہ قرآن مجید میں اسی کوئی بنیاد نہیں ہے, کسی صحیح حدیث میں اسی کوئی بنیاد نہیں ہے, اور اللہ تعالیٰ نے معصوم عن الخطا صرف پیغمبروں ہی کو مانا ہے, اور وہ بھی صرف مذہب کے معاملے میں, کہ مذہبی لحاظ سے اللہ تعالیٰ ان سے ہم کلام ہوتے ہیں, اور مذہب کو جب وہ ڈیلیور کرتے ہیں تو اس میں کوئی کمی کوتاہی نہیں ہوتی, جیسا کہ اللہ تعالیٰ نے ان کو دیا ہے وہ ویسے ہی آگے ڈیلیور کر دیتے ہیں. اس کے علاوہ یہ سٹیٹس کسی اور انسان یا شخصیت کو نہیں دیا گیا. یہ ہمارے اہل تشیع بھائی ہیں جو اثنا عشری ہیں جو یہ رائے رکھتے ہیں.
تو سر ہمارے بارے میں کیا عقیدہ ہونا چاہیے؟
جی
میں نے
آپ دوبارہ نہیں, ہم یہی کہیں گے کہ ہمیں ان کو اس نقطہ نظر سے ہمیں اختلاف ہے. یہ ایسے ہی ہے جیسے کسی بھی انٹرپریٹیشن میں آپ کو کسی سے اختلاف ہو جائے, آپ کہیں جی کہ ہمیں آپ کی بات جو ہے وہ ٹھیک نہیں لگتی, تا وقت ہے کہ آپ کی بات سمجھ میں نہ آ جائے, فی الحال آپ کی بات سمجھ میں نہیں آئی ہوئی. تو ایسا ہی ہے کہ جیسے کسی بھی نقطہ نظر میں آپ کو کسی سے اختلاف ہو سکتا ہے. اختلاف کا مطلب یہ نہیں ہے کہ آپ ان کے مخالف ہو جائیں یا ان کو برا بھلا کہنا شروع کر دیں یا ان کے ساتھ ڈسرسپیکٹ شو کریں. ان کے آپ نقطہ نظر کو رسپیکٹ کریں. سب سے پہلی بات یہ ہے کہ اختلاف رائے جو ہوتی ہے وہ شروع یہاں سے ہوتی ہے کہ آپ یہ کہتے ہیں کہ جی میں عاجزانہ طور پہ ہمبلی اپنی بات کو صحیح سمجھتا ہوں, اور آپ کی بات کو غلط سمجھتا ہوں, لیکن وہ صحیح ہو سکتی ہے جب تک کہ مجھے اگر سمجھ میں آ جائے گی تو میں ایکسیپٹ کر لوں گا. تو آپ ڈفرینس آف اوپینین کو ہمیشہ رسپیکٹ کریں.
میں یہ پوچھنا چاہ رہا ہوں کہ جو عام مسلمان ہیں ان کا کیا عقیدہ ہونا چاہیے, اہل تشیع کا وہ ہے, ہمارا کیا ہونا چاہیے؟
میں نے تو اسی کا جواب دیا ہے. میں نے تو آپ کو یہ بتایا ہے کہ اگر آپ مجھ سے پوچھ رہے ہیں, میں باقیوں کا تو نہیں کہہ سکتا, تو مجھے تو اس سے اتفاق نہیں ہے 12 اماموں کا جو ثبوت ہے یا جو وجود ہے, اور یہ بات کہ وہ معصومین ہیں یا معصوم عن الخطا ہیں, مجھے اس سے اتفاق نہیں ہے. میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ یہ سٹیٹس صرف پیغمبر کو حاصل ہے.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Alian Saab, for your question. Dr. Saleem, we don't have any questions at this time, but I have a question. So what is our thought on the mandir that was made in Abu Dhabi for Hindus? What does Islam say about that?
Right.
Is it the entire region that is supposed to be
Yes.
without?
So you see, this is a very sensitive and a very important topic. I'm glad you raised this. We have to understand that the Almighty, in the times of prophethood, in the times of the prophetic era, He had selected two places. One was Jerusalem and the other was the land of Arabia, that were made as centers of monotheism, centers of Tawheed. It was as if this was a sample of how the Almighty would like His kingdom to be, in which there would be no trace of any form of polytheism. So this was the status that was formerly occupied by Jerusalem or the land of Palestine, and once they were deposed, the same status was accorded to the land of Arabia. It was one area in which the Almighty wants that nothing but Tawheed, nothing but monotheism should prevail. So yes, this is the land of Arabia in which a temple cannot be constructed, any other worship place cannot be constructed, unless of course it is for a temporary use as a prayer place, especially for those who live there as ambassadors of their countries or in any other way. Otherwise, Islam does not want to give any permanent residence to this place, just the place of Arabia, because it wants one place in the whole wide world that should be an exemplary place that should display the creed and the norms of monotheism. All the rest of the countries, all the rest of the Muslim countries, they have this, provision that any temple, any synagogue, any church, any worship place belonging to any denomination can be built in any Muslim country. So this is just specific to the area that we call Arabia, because that is one place which God wants to be displayed as a model of monotheism. So yes, this is something that they have perhaps not realized, and they think that just as other countries, other Muslim countries should have places of worship like temples and synagogues and churches, so the land of Arabia should also be very similar to that, without realizing that this is a very specific case, that for the rest of the countries, yes, this provision is there, but just for Arabia, the Almighty wants it to be a model monotheistic country.
So isn't it very, very sad? I can't find a better word. The Prophet specifically came for this. At the time of the Prophet's prophethood, Kaaba itself was full of deities, and this is what's happening in Arabia now. How are we to address this when we are talking to our children or trying to explain to them living in this multicultural society that, this is not allowed, this permanence is not allowed? Is there a way to word it well?
As I said, you can tell them that all other Muslim countries, there are 60 approximately Muslim countries, and each of these countries, religious freedom and all sorts of worship places, there is absolutely nothing at all which is against that. Every Muslim country must give this freedom to all forms of religion. This is just the status of the land of Arabia, that because it was a land in which the Prophet was told it's not something that he did himself. The Almighty wants one area in the whole wide world that must be demarcated as the center of monotheism, in which no trace of polytheism should interfere or intervene. So it's like a model land of monotheism that God wants, so that people should have this emphasis in their mind that this creed of monotheism, the fact that we are just bound with one God and that we have one God, should stand out and shine from one place, giving this message to everyone that God wants only Him to be worshipped and no other deity to be worshipped.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. Okay, now we have a few questions. iPhone, that's what you referred to. If you can just unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saad. Actually, my question is very much linked to the last question you just had. It's a geographical question. So, in today's day and age, where you have nation states, which didn't exist before World War II, part A really, what does land of Arabia in today's nation states represent?
Yeah. So actually, Arabia is not a nation state. They are nation states that were made, and they are now made after World War II. But this status of Arabia was the one that it holds ever since the time of the Prophet. And that is why when he was leaving this world, he had said, La yajtami'u fihi dinan. And prior to that, the Quran had said that this land of Arabia should only have monotheism. Liyuzhirahu ala dini kulli. This is Surah Saf. So the Prophet and the Quran both telling people that this land of Arabia, once that has now been made the center of Tawheed, this status of that land should always remain. So it never was given the status of a nation state. It persisted to be a state of Tawheed ever since the time of the Prophet. Nation states, of course, were the ones that resulted after World War II. Once new countries were formed and they won freedom, and we know there was a bunch of countries. So Arabia never won freedom from anyone. It was there all the time since the time of the Prophet. So therefore, this status of monotheistic center was the one that was given to it in the times of the Prophet. And he specifically said this, and the Quran also before him said this, that this is the place in which no other religion must be allowed to give permanence. So that has a very special status. It cannot be regarded to be a nation state.
So in today's, which countries that for example, is that UAE, that
the land of Arabia, the whole Arabian Peninsula. If you look at the map of the world, the ancient map of the world, not that ancient, but the times of the Prophet, the peninsula that you can see which juts forth in the Arabian Sea, that is the area which was demarcated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Riaz Khan, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you.
There's a
Walaikum assalam.
persistent question when we go for in interfaith situations. We say that all the faiths, I mean, all of everyone are Muslims, or have. I mean, the Quran says that everyone has been Muslim, and then the Christians and the Jews they asked you the question. They said, "Why do you say we're Muslims, or we have been Muslims?" Is that?
So you see, this is because the Quran has said that the name Muslim was given by Abraham to his followers. Huwassammakumul Muslimin. If you read the last part of Surah Hajj, it tells us that Abraham, who is the progenitor of these Abrahamic faiths, he gave them the name of Muslim. And the word Muslim here is not used in its, as a term, but in its literal meaning, which means to submit to God. So the word Muslim later on became a term. In the times of Prophet Abraham, he said that I'm going to give you this name of Muslim, but it literally meant people who are going to submit to God. So when the Christians and the Jews and the followers of the Quran, they are given this name, later on, of course, it became a term, but when it was originally, accorded to them or bestowed upon them, it was meant in the sense that you are one who are going to show obedience to God. And yes, the Prophet Abraham gave it that explicit mention also. If you look up Surah Hajj, the last verses, it says that Huwajtabakum wa ma ja'ala alaykum fid dini min haraj. And then it says, by mentioning Prophet Abraham, it says, Huwasammakumul Muslimin, that he is the one who gave you the name of Muslims. So because this history is not very much in front of the Jews and Christians, though they do raise this question.
So then,
Go ahead, you have another.
I'm not, yes, please go ahead. We could not hear you earlier on.
Okay, the followers of Prophet Muhammad would be called Muslims. And then when we call Muslims before the Prophet would that be?
As I said, that is not in the literal meaning. That is in that metaphorical meaning, which means the people who submit to God.
Okay, thank you. Nogair 20, please ask your question.
जी डॉक्टर साहब, मेरा सवाल ये है कि एक कमेंट्री वल असर की ये की जाती है कि हजरत आदम अलैहिस्सलाम से लेके आखिरी प्रॉफिट तक तमाम लोग जो है ना वो खसारे में हैं, और ये इस्लामिक अगर आप इसकी आप इंटरप्रिटेशन करते हैं। दूसरी तरफ इसी को लेके लोग कहते हैं कि लोग जितने भी हैं ना आज तक इतने लोग पैदा हुए हैं वो सारे खसारे में हैं। So which interpretation we have to take, because both are appealing?
I think that if you look at the various commentaries, I have lectured on this topic as well. I would suggest that you pick up the commentary of Ustaz Amin Islahi or Ustaz Ghamidi's Al-Bayan. It will tell you that the word wow is not used in this general sense. It signifies an oath, and an oath is not something which emphasizes a statement. It is something which bears witness to a premise. So the word wal asr is referring to the era of prophethood, the era from Adam to Muhammad, which bears witness that whenever these people, these followers, they followed the line of the Almighty that was given to them, they were rewarded in this world. So that is why the subsequent verses says, Illa lazina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr, which means that time bears witness, which means that prophetic era bears witness that whenever people professed faith in God and did righteous deeds, they were rewarded by the Almighty. Because this era was from Adam to Muhammad, and it was in his time that the Quran was being revealed, that the era is being presented as a testimony. Something which is going to come later on cannot be presented as a testimony, because things have yet to happen. So this is specifically referring to the era of Adam to Muhammad. I'll just briefly refer to the reasoning, otherwise I would advise you to look up the tafsir of Ustaz Ghamidi.
Okay. Dr. Saleem, we have no more questions at this time. If there's any questions, please, this is the time to ask your questions, audience. Otherwise, we will be ending our session soon.